Hello, everybody. It's Peter. Peter with an I, S-T-A-W-A-R-T. Welcome to segment 35 of...
I don't know, the Dark Tower, I guess?
Joe came to the realization that the only reason he believed he was intelligent was his ability to look at any argument, ignore the wisdom of what's right or wrong, good or bad, and debate in favor of the other side. If someone were to say criminals should be locked away, he could argue against it. If someone were to say that kids shouldn't smoke crack, he could come up with a list of reasons why they should be able to. Joe had the gift of being unbiased, with the ability to overlook detrimental effects on society. In fact, he could argue that crack could help, or even save, the pillars of society from crumbling. Or cracking. Joe decided he was a worm. If nothing else, at least he had a moment of honesty. Chapter 33. Nancy was just getting off work and making her way through the lobby. She did a little detour over to the coffee machine across from the security office. She had planned on coming back that night, and didn't want the moonlight security guard to foil her plans. She knelt down to see inside the machine's dispenser port, where it poured coffee into a cup. She felt inside, but she couldn't figure out where, exactly, coffee poured out of. She expected there to be a nozzle of some sort. She could position a sleeping pill just right, so the next coffee it would make would put whoever drank it out for the count. Of course, the security guard working the night shift needs coffee and would naturally use the machine right across from their office, but Nancy couldn't figure out where the coffee came out from. She needed to run a test. She put some change in the slot, knelt back down, and looked in the servo port. After some clicks and whirring sounds, the paper cup came down, and automatically hot coffee started shooting into it. She took out the cup, but still couldn't see where the coffee was coming out from, so she put her hand in there. As much as she tried to keep her fingers clear of the hot coffee, she got burned by the boiling liquid. As she pulled her hand out, she got hosed. Nancy jumped when the security guard spoke up from behind her. "You know you're supposed to use a cup, right?" he asked. Nancy couldn't help but snicker at the idea of someone trying to cup burning hot coffee with their hands like it was a fountain of water. Nancy wiped her hands on her gown. "I don't speak English," she said. The security guard, who had his coffee thermos with him, understood and nodded his head. She might not have been able to speak English, but she sure had that phrase down pat, accent and everything. She decided she would have to take another approach. From the position of the hands on her watch, Nancy knew it was late, but it was rather striking when she walked out the doors and saw how dark it had gotten outside. Being under fluorescent lights for so many hours threw her sense of time out of whack. The lamps over the cyclone corridor cast a design on the cement below. Nancy first assumed that the corridor, which was composed of 3 faces of fencing tied together with wire, was the same sort of public shield temporarily constructed over busy, urban sidewalks while construction is being done on buildings overhead. But there was no construction going on anywhere near the sidewalks leading from the clinic to the parking lots. And even if there was, any stray chips of building material or dust would freely land on people walking through because the roof was cyclone fencing, as opposed to plywood or corrugated fiberglass. The question mark which had churned to the surface of her mind was stirred right back into the jumble of buzzing frustration over the workday she had just endured, and the promise of more of the same tomorrow. She had been filing for what seemed forever. Whenever she thought she had started to get a foothold on the paperwork, she would find another pile of papers that the former filing clerk had hidden so he wouldn't have to stand all the way up to put them away. Everyone in the office had been under the impression that he was really good at his job, because he would take a stack of documents and return within minutes, claiming he was done. It smacked of Nancy's childhood trick of doing away with food that she didn't want to eat, She would sneak it under the table and place it into the shelf provided by the pull-apart leaf mechanism. If she didn't want to eat, for example, the rest of a hot roll, she would push it against the last piece of unwanted food and move the train along. In preparation for an Easter celebration in which all the relatives would be coming over, and the surface area of the table needed to be expanded with leaf planks to compensate for the extra company, the table was pulled apart. As the wood slid on wood for the first time in years, the space which Nancy used to hide her food was like a hidden corridor that had been buried by the sands of ancient Egypt through the millennia. The line of food had been mummified. The remains at the head of the line, which were the oldest, were from meals served so long ago, they predated New Year's Eve celebrations twice gone by. Pieces of broccoli looked like dried, shrunken heads. A baked potato had petrified and turned into a stone, along with a piece of toast. Bite marks from a perfectly preserved hamburger revealed the artifact had been placed in the tomb before young Nancy had lost certain baby teeth. Everyone found Nancy's little ritual of hiding food rather amusing, but no one was laughing on that Easter when everyone thought that she was the one who had hid a colored egg in the muffler of a car and had sprayed Aunt Genevieve. It was Jezebel who framed her, and it was Jezebel who Nancy brutally exposed as the culprit when she stood on the picnic table, turned the volume of her fancy-free recorder up, and had everyone listen to the audio tape evidence that cleared her name. That was a long time ago, and yet it wasn't long ago at all. Nancy got a chill as her mind played little games on her as she passed under the next lamp. Despite herself, she took a look back to make sure the coast was clear. It was, of course, but she quickened her pace nonetheless. High above, the dentist sat in his special chair, which was raised on the steel pedestal. From his vantage, he could see down upon everything. The stream of headlights from the cars that commuted over the nearby trestle, the glow of the sky behind the mountain range, the landscaping around the clinic. Aside from enjoying the general aesthetics of the night, he liked to sit up there with the lights turned low, so he could wear his crown. His crown was a white hat, which was in the shape of a molar tooth, with white horny points raised upward in prowess. He noticed someone walking through one of the cyclone galleries far below. When she passed under one of the streetlights, he recognized the color of the clothes and the way she walked. It was the new girl who worked in his office. For lack of anything else to focus on, he watched her. From a ways away, he noticed something dart through the shadows outside the protective shuttle. He sat up and removed his crown. He strained to separate the silhouettes from the shadows. It could have been a crow flying from bush to bush. It could have been a figment of his imagination. Nancy was wrapped up in her own thoughts, picturing the caper she was going to pull off that night and going over it in her mind. In the darkness behind her, she heard a crack. She looked around, but the glare of the light she was under compromised her sight. It could have been a million innocent things, but it could have been something bad. The cyclone hallway offered some sense of security, but not much. She walked on, ignoring her fears, putting them aside for later. From high above, the dentist was beside himself. He watched as the darkened figure prowled around through the shadows. This was no crow or trick of his imagination. It made its way toward the end of the protective fencing, where Nancy would let herself out, and where she would be completely vulnerable. The dentist toggled the switch to bring the chair down, but the hydraulics were slow. He made a jump to the floor, pulled the phone to his chest, and looked for the button labeled Security. Nobody was answering the phone in the security office, as Nancy made it to the end of the fence gallery and dug through her pockets in search for her keys to undo the lock that secured the terminal end of the enclosed shelter.